and let people join as they are able. And we're now recording, so that you know that as well. Good evening. My name is Dave Beal. I'm your host this evening. I'm a member of the In the City for Good steering committee. And this is one of our frequent forums that we have over the course of the year, where we try to bring people in to speak about issues that are important to our city. This evening, we are very pleased to have with us members of the DMC Corporation Board and the Executive Director of the DMC Economic Development Agency. This is a forum we'd hoped actually to have about a year ago. We knew that DMC was undergoing a 5-year review, as the legislation asked them to, and also to look at the next 5 years. And we thought that would be a good time to kind of touch base and see where things are at. And then you know what happened. So instead of this forum, we had a forum, and I believe Mayor Norton joined us for that when we had a forum on, I'm trying to unmute people, so I'm multitasking here. Kimberly's iPhone. That's why I couldn't find you. There you go. So we ended up having a forum on our preparation for COVID and our response to COVID, and that's what we did last year instead of this. So it wasn't a waste of time. But this evening, we did want to get back and take an opportunity to take a look at where the Destination Medical Center project was at. This initiative, this very big and major initiative, is actually responsible in its own way for In the City for Good. This group had its origins in about 80 people getting together in a church to try to figure out what was going on with this new thing that was coming to town, and try to understand all the plans that were happening around it. And at some point they decided, well, let's get together on a regular basis. And that group became In the City for Good. And we've been active since 2015. Our purpose is basically to kind of look at the changes that are going on in town, not just with the Destination Medical Center, and especially around economic development and social justice, to make sure that the whole community benefits from these changes. And so we engage mainly in education activities like this and some advocacy. This evening, we're joined by 3 members of the Destination Medical Center Board. Mayor Norton is joining us. She's currently the vice chair of the DMC Corporation Board, and had a small role, I think, in the legislation. Actually, the mayor was I think, regarded as the author of the original DMC legislation.
In the House.
And, yeah, in the House, and struggles with authorial intent daily. Yes. So she's a member of the board by virtue of being mayor. The mayor of Rochester is by legislation a member of the DMC board. Also with us is Paul Williams, who's president and CEO of the Project for Pride in Living. He's currently the secretary of the DMC Corporation. One thing I think worthy of noting here is that when Mr. Williams joined the board, he came down to Rochester to hold a series of listening sessions with the community. And he invited members of the In the City for Good group to come and sit down with him at the foundation. I think that's where we met. And we had a very good conversation with Mr. Williams, and we appreciated that very much. It's a very candid conversation. He encouraged that, and we delivered, I think. So we appreciate that. Also is Brooke Carlson, president of the Rochester City Council, who's a member of the DMCC board. And like the mayor, the president of the Rochester City Council is a member of the board by virtue of the legislation. So, and finally, we have Patrick Sieb, who came to Rochester in September of 2015 as the Director of Economic Development and Placemaking with the Destination Medical Center Economic Development Authority, Agency, I'm sorry. Is it agency, right? Agency. And at the first of this year, he became the Executive Director of the DMC EDA. I noted in a meeting a couple of weeks ago that we were both in, that Patrick actually came to the second meeting of this group when we were still having something called the In the Shadow of Growth forums. And he had just arrived in town, and he showed up at our second meeting as we were actually kind of getting in the city for good organized, listened, took some notes, and people were impressed that he came so early and began to hear the concerns that people were having with the changes that were going on in town and their aspirations for the community. So I think, Patrick, you've joined us once before, I believe. I know you've attended some of our meetings, but you were on the panel on one occasion, and we're certainly happy to have you back this evening.
Thank you.
Our format's going to be this, is that Patrick has a brief presentation to kind of lay the groundwork in terms of what's currently going on with DMC. And then that'll be followed by a Q&A. As is our practice when we've gone online, we solicited questions from folks via email, and we have several of those, but we'll also be taking questions via chat. You've probably noticed that your mics are turned off. You're welcome to turn your cameras on if you want. Sometimes the bandwidth is better if you leave them off. But if you do have a question, you can enter that in the chat. I do want to mention that Mayor Norton will be leaving for another forum on homelessness that some faith communities are conducting this evening, and she'll have to leave around 7:30. Also, the League of Women Voters is having their annual meeting tonight, and I was reminded that Minnesota Wild is doing something. So
Yeah.
there's a lot going on. All right.
And I'm on the League of Women Voters board and missing that completely, but oh well.
Oh, well, we appreciate you coming.
Absolutely.
So, Patrick, I'll give you the screen, and if you want to give your presentation and make whatever comments you want, and then we'll move on to an open discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Dave, and for everybody that's here, and a lot of familiar faces and names that people I've come to know over my past 5 years here, and I look forward to this conversation. And I really do encourage you to put your cameras on if your internet supports that. It is always helpful in these conversations to be able to see people's faces, at least virtually. And it sounds like maybe the protocol is to stay on mute. So I don't want to violate that protocol, but feel free to unmute yourself, because I really hope this is more of a conversation than a one-sided presentation. And if you have questions, and I know there are some that have been received in advance, if there are questions, things that you want us to talk about, better for me to know it now and be able to adjust my comments to be sure to capture the questions or curiosities that you might have. So feel free to populate the chat box with any questions you have at the outset. And I think, Dave, there is another audience who may be participating via Facebook Live, so we're not seeing necessarily everybody who is listening in, and you're monitoring questions from that platform, I take it?
Yeah.
So with that, I thought I would do a brief presentation. And I had it, here we go. I thought I would do a brief presentation. And could you just confirm that you're seeing a DMC slide on the screen?
Yes.
I thought I would do a brief presentation. I've been talking to Council President Carlson about soliciting her help and others in terms of really simplifying and making more clear and more transparent what DMC is. And so in many ways, every time I do a version of this presentation, it is really aimed at how to make more clear and more accessible the work that we do, and therefore the way in which you can engage and contribute to and help shape the work. And so I'm going to give it a go again here tonight and just say that in many ways, it's not very complicated what we are and what DMC is. We have a mission statement that's been frequently presented and well documented. This idea that tapping into Mayo Clinic, that Rochester will be a destination for health and wellness, attracting people, investment, and jobs supporting economic growth to Minnesota and its bioscience sector. So we have a mission, and we have a set of goals. These are measurable goals that were established when the development plan was created. So we have a clear set of goals, targets, if you will, or what we're hoping to achieve. So we have a mission, we have measurable goals, and we can debate these and talk about these, but we have measurable goals that talk about what we hope to achieve. And we have resources, financial resources. $585 million, in fact, that we are able to direct, that are designed to attract $5.6 billion in private investment. And this slide shows that little wedge of the pie that is the $585 million that's intended to help attract $5.6 billion. And these are the sources. So it gets complicated because the money comes from different sources and there's conditions associated with it and checks and balances. But in its simplest form, DMCC is established to achieve a mission, realize certain targets, and use resources that have been established through the state law to enable that. And there are some boundaries around what the funds can be used for. So it's not carte blanche. The wisdom of the state legislature. And remember, this is nearly 7 years. It was 7 years ago, 2013. So if I did my math right, it was eight years ago that this law was written. And in many ways, it predated the thinking around infrastructure being more than just streets and sewers. It certainly is streets and sewers, but it really goes beyond that. But there are constraints around how these funds can be used to achieve these objectives in ambition of this mission. I say that it was forward thinking in 2013 because now as we hear the Biden administration talk about infrastructure, we hear a very sort of a new generation thinking around what infrastructure is. And I think, as I said, in 2013, our legislative leaders and the governor were also thinking very progressively. It also established an organization, the DMC EDA, the organization I work for, which is established to support the DMC corporation. And we have a set of responsibilities that are written in law as well. And they are spelled out, and these are the things we are obligated to do. Development planning and promotion, development services, so sort of the technical work, and marketing, outreach, and communications, because a part of our job is not only to help advise our board about how to use $585 million to achieve and position Rochester for growth, but the other part of our job is to ensure that we grow, to have a marketing program that attracts new investment to Rochester. And that's, I sometimes refer to that as the more invisible work that we do that results in new investment, new capital, new projects coming to Rochester. And there is a staff and an organizational structure to support this. So again, a mission, a set of measurable objectives, financial resources that allow us to achieve those objectives, constraints and limitations, but also some clarity around how funds can be used and the role of our organization, which must include these, not limited to these, and the relationships, formal relationships we have with the city and the county and the state. But here's the magic. The magic is the principles that really are the spirit of the work that we do, that really guide the work we do, that is the lens through which we look at opportunities. And these principles were established in 2015. I think they meet the test of time. I think they've been evergreen in terms of helping us be responsive and sensitive to changing conditions in the environment and new needs. A bold and compelling vision, sustaining Rochester and the region as a destination medical center and an economic engine, market-driven strategies, dynamic and accessible urban core, mobility and transit solutions, a model for sustainability. So when we talk about an accessible urban core, this is when we think about affordable housing and living opportunities that give more people a chance to live and prosper. When we talk about sustainability, it's where we think about equity as a core component of sustainability. So maybe the words weren't used then in 2015, but these principles enable us to respond to the conditions of the day, but in a way that that really creates the character of the spirit of these goals. And I think it's really where the conversation tonight wants to be, is around how do we understand these principles? How do we live them in today's environment and changing conditions and what we're learning in the community? And all of this helps us shape. I mean, ultimately it gets translated into a budget, and, you know, there's different ways of presenting how one goes about, you know, using resources against all of the competing opportunities and all of the choices that could come before us, and how do we translate those into an annual budget, which ultimately has to happen. And so we've had this conversation, been having this conversation with our board. I think maybe, Dave, I'd like to just pause at that. I think this is really what I wanted to do. I have probably 250 other slides I could use, but I think what I really wanted to do is set up this conversation with, in a way, trying to make more clear and transparent what we are and how we fit in. And you know, I guess I will talk about one thing that one of the things I also want to reflect on, and I credit Paul Williams, who's been a longtime colleague and mentor of mine, who talks about the importance of building capacity. That and this goes back to my work in St. Paul, it goes back to other work, but it's true here as well. Building capacity, working differently, building systems that enable us to be successful going forward. And so we've talked about ways in which we have been approaching the Heart of the City project with a business forward strategy. And this business forward strategy, this idea that when a city is undergoing a tremendous amount of construction, how do you rethink construction and how it gets done so that it is less disruptive, in fact more enabling. So again, I think it's best if I pause and allow board members to talk, and certainly hear from you, Dave, and members, and the questions that, oh, I'm sorry, Christine, I didn't see your note. So.
Okay. I did want to invite the board members to, if they wanted to comment, to introduce themselves more fully, or just to bring their perspective to the conversation as we get started. So Paul, would you mind starting that part of the conversation? And I just want to say, I think we're a manageable enough size that I think, though I want to share some of the questions that we got by email, I think we'll go ahead and open it up to questions here rather than using the chat box. So, and if you're all familiar, on your reactions tab, you have a button to raise your hand, and that's how we'll know that you have something you want to ask. So Paul, do you have some thoughts you want to share as we get started?
I've just been jotting notes down here, and as a former deputy mayor, I have to say it's a little uncomfortable to go before both the mayor and a city council president. So I appreciate the opportunity, and it's always good to kind of, for me, to revisit just kind of the framework, and it's because I still consider myself kind of a newbie, just probably 2-3 years in, and when I first came to Rochester into this role, my intentionality around coming to sit with community was very was very intentional. And so for folks who don't know me, I've worked in community development, affordable housing development, inner city revitalization, really for my entire career, both as kind of a lender, as a grant maker, up in St. Paul. I'm born and raised in the historic African-American community in St. Paul, the Rondo neighborhood, and worked nationally for a stretch, kind of looking at what does community development look like around the country. And so when the DMC opportunity came up, I very specifically was interested in, because I am so used to going to communities where there is substantial disinvestment, where we're begging anybody to come in and do the work of redevelopment. And so for me, my curiosity was to come to a place where there's actually quite a bit of resource, energy, right? It's not a disinvested, broken community, and to see what it would look like to try and really catalyze community from a place of strength. And so I approach this from a place of strength. Now, at my core, I am about community voice. And at my core, I am about kind of organizing and about the underdog. And so, so I appreciate the frankness of our original conversation. And I talked to a whole bunch of people who had a whole lot to say in those first visits. And I carry that with me. And in every community that I have been to across this country, voice matters. And there's often a disconnect between the institutional kind of effort and voice. And so part of what I bring to this, very, very upfront about it, is wanting to see that voice more intentionally incorporated and integrated into the work of DMC. And I have seen progress. I have seen progress on that front in my short tenure here. And I know there are others who share that same passion, certainly within DMC on the staff and in the board members. So Mayor Norton, Council President Carlson, certainly both bringing that. And voice is complicated, isn't it? There's a lot of voice out there, and boy, haven't we seen that, in spades here in the last year. Voice is very complicated, but I have faith in this community and in the folks gathered here to bring that voice. And again, so among the 250 other slides that Patrick has, I just have to say, I've been asking this question: make sure that the whole community benefits, Dave. That was one of the I think the principles of in the city for good, kind of intent and goal statements. And when I look at things like some of the work around Heart of the City, the Chateau Theater, even though we're in a pandemic, pause, that to me starts to speak to broader community impact. When I look at some of the Discovery Walk work in the public arts and a different way of doing business, as Patrick said, a different process for engaging community and community artists in that project. I see some real promise there. When I see, I think, some groundbreaking investment by DMC in the Burke apartments, affordable housing. I see progress there, and amongst all of that, to come through the last year plus of the pandemic and to still have momentum in the marketplace, to me feels really positive. So there's a ton of work to do, and my goodness, all the engagement around transit and future development, all feels like we're moving in the right direction. So to the extent that with this conversation's about the first 5 years, I don't know a ton about the first 5 years. This next 5 years, I'm excited for, recognizing that we all had just a major pause here in the last year. And I can tell you up here in the Twin Cities where I spend most of my time, and I spend most of my time on the very corridors that were at the heart of the social unrest, the riots, remarkable work by a lot of folks to come through that. So I say bravo, and let's keep at it. So not sure if that's what you're looking for, but that's what's on my mind.
I was looking for whatever you had on your mind, so you gave us that. Thank you for that. And Patrick, a man with a stack of 250 slides, is showing admirable restraint, so we appreciate that too. Let's hear Mayor Norton. Why don't we hear from you next, since I know you'll be leaving us soon, and I doubt that there's very few people in this town that's been at this as long as you have. So you certainly have a long view, and maybe you could offer that for us tonight.
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about that, and you and I talked at the very beginning as well, and so it's interesting, you know, all these years later to be able to talk about this with you. So one of the things that was kind of interesting about Destination Medical Center and its vision, it was done very quietly with a very small group of people who I think did some brainstorming. And when I was approached to carry the legislation, nobody knew anything about it. And so, you know, to be a legislator and go into the session being asked to carry this really remarkable piece of legislation that, of course, changed a lot from its original form to when it passed a few months later, that no one knew anything about was amazing, actually. And as I learned about it, and as I said, well, does the city know about this? No, the city really didn't know about this. Does the county know about this? Well, no, well, you better be telling them, right? So from an idea that was hatched in order to spur the economy in Rochester, to create a community that was welcoming for not only the people that live here, but also the visitors that are in the downtown area, a reinvestment in our downtown, from kind of a quietly planned event to we're carrying legislation and it's going to pass was, you know, quite a challenge and very interesting. And I remember from the very beginning saying, you guys need to talk to the city. You guys need to talk to the county. Folks need to come on board because we don't give private entities money. We give other governmental bodies money in a bonding or, you know, however, at the beginning we were talking about bonding. It didn't go to, the state doesn't give money to private entities. It gives them to other governmental bodies. So a lot of talk went on. And as that talk went on, and as this piece of, you know, this dream of legislation and economic development for our community continued to grow and change, it was, how do we do this so that it's going to benefit the community? I know you came to my office, Dave, and talked about, we don't want a bunch of low-paying jobs. We need to make sure that we're not just creating a situation where the rich get richer and a whole lot of people get poorer. You were very concerned about that. And other people were concerned about preserving the historic districts downtown. So there were all these other pieces that came into this. And when the legislation passed, very different than its initial format, it was all about infrastructure. It was all about Mayo Clinic and private investors investing, and the state would follow and would, you know, build that infrastructure. And as Patrick explained, you know, what they spent money on ended up changing because the way the bill was funded and who funded it changed over the years. Initially, there was a teeny, I'm not even sure the initial one even had city money, but if it was very small. In the end, it was 128 million from the city that they hadn't budgeted for, right? So we had to create methods for them to get the money to put in that 128 million. So when it passed, my message to it wasn't Patrick at the time, but to Lisa Clark and Mayo Clinic, the docs and the lobbyists they sent up was, now you need to go back and inform the community and let them understand what you're doing. Right. So it was a very, so then a lot of community engagement happened sort of after the fact. And I recall coming back from the legislative session that first year and seeing all these community engagement opportunities at the Civic Center where people could come in and give their input. And that happened not at the beginning of the process, but before any development happened. So those early years when people were saying, you got that money, why isn't anything being built? It was because they were sharing the vision with the community and getting input about what does that look like. And since then, all of us have been talking about how do we make this, and the reason, that I wanted to come back and help this community through the growth period, how do we take this remarkable investment that the state is making paired with the city and county and make sure that whatever is done benefits the people that live here, that gives good paying jobs, and it makes the community a place where Mayo Clinic can thrive and visitors are happy. It can't be one, it can't be the other. How are you going to do all of it? And I will say currently we've got a couple thousand, now that we're in the building phase finally, a year or so ago, we've just gotten to the building part of it. We do have several thousand really good paying jobs in the construction industry. This is front end, right? And now we've seen one Discovery Square filled with jobs, 2 Discovery Squares being built. Right now it's just construction. But the pandemic has kind of put a pause on what else we're going to see. And in fact, the supportive industries who typically support even prior to DMC, but support Mayo Clinic in our downtown, have been dramatically impacted by the pandemic. And so our focus this past year, DMC has been part of it, but the city, Rochester Ready, which is a group of people, have been trying to help all those people, who lost their jobs, whose businesses are barely getting by because there aren't visitors in town and the community's not been going downtown. We've been trying to keep everybody afloat. And it's not just the businesses, it's been individuals. And so that, that's the whole story of the pandemic. But that was kind of my involvement with DMC at the beginning. It is a daily, weekly, monthly concern that we continue to make sure that DMC develops so that it's good for Mayo Clinic, it's good for our downtown businesses, and ultimately it's good for everybody that lives in this community. And so with that, I'll say that's the eye that many of us have on DMC. How do we get that right balance?
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I think you remember the words of my conversation, but I remember the music differently. So
You remember the what differently?
I remember the music a little bit differently. At least I hope so. President Carlson, you're relatively new to this. You're a new member of you're newly elected in your position on the council, and as by virtue of that, a new member of the board. So we get another perspective from you, and then we'll open it up to questions and comments from folks who have joined us.
Sure. Can you hear me? My internet is terrible tonight. Okay. Well, I don't have as long of opening comments as Paul and Mayor Norton, but it's really an honor to be on the DMC board. Obviously, I'm very new and new on council. One of the really positive things is that I'm new alongside Patrick. So we have the opportunity to sort of grow into our positions together. And I think we've formed a really strong working relationship, have, connected, and I've seen how responsive Patrick and his team are to some of the ideas that I certainly heard during my campaign and now continuing to connect with people, including this need to be sure that we are as transparent as possible and continuing our engagement as deeply and authentically as possible to make sure that this work is beneficial to everyone in our community and people do understand what DMC means to them, because so many times I hear, well, what is DMC? How do you describe it? What does it mean to me on a daily basis? And the benefit of me being on council and on the DMC board, and I don't know if the mayor has this experience too, but we get to see how the work ties to our broader work within the community. So I think we have a tendency to view DMC as these very specific projects going on. But if you start to think about how the DMC projects fit together as a system that then has fingers out into our community, it makes a lot more sense to me why it's beneficial to, for instance, work on Discovery Walk, which will hopefully lead to work into Soldiers Field, which will lead to a connection down over to the riverfront small area plan. And so it's more of a sort of fingers into the community. So I'm doing a lot of learning right now, a lot of good conversations with the city staff, with the mayor, with Paul and others from the DMC board, getting to know their different perspectives, and certainly Patrick, and how do we make sure that this is an effort that is truly driven by community voice, and we are seeing the actual fruits of those conversations with our community co-design work. And how do we make sure that it isn't just seen as this downtown Mayo Clinic project, which it is beneficial for, but it is so much bigger than that, and it will affect our major priorities as a community around social equity and environmental stewardship and so on and so forth. So those are my 2 cents to begin with, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay. Thank you, President Carlson. So let's open it up to questions. Again, if you are familiar with Zoom, down on the reaction button, you'll see something that says raise hand. So if you want to ask a question, please go ahead. But while you're kind of gathering momentum for that, you know what? Jeremy, are you there? Jeremy?
I am here, Dave.
Yeah, Jeremy, you submitted a question. I thought since you're here, you might want to ask it in person. So that'd be a good way for us to start. I'll put you on the spot. Do you remember what your question was?
You really are putting me on the spot because I do not remember what my question
Okay, you had a question. I just happen to have it here in front of me.
Okay.
It relates to housing. You are asking about condominiums, and
Yes.
you are asking how our panel saw the urban ownership playing out with DMC.
Yeah.
Does that remind you?
Thanks, Dave. Yes, absolutely. So we see lots of rentals being built, and even countywide, we know that condominium building in general is down. We see some of the issues with resales of some of the older condos in town, which I think has an impact. But yeah, I was just wondering how you see condos and specifically the home ownership model working in the DMC.
Patrick, I wondered if, as you answer this, if you could clarify for people, what were I think it was 6 pillars that we started with of DMC. What was when you came to, you weren't hired yet. What were the 6? And I think they expanded it, but there were 6 pillars. Do you remember what those were?
I'm sorry, there are so many different
There was like
descriptors.
entertainment, leisure activities. There were the foundation things. And I just want folks to understand, when this started, housing was not part of it. Since that time, because housing has been such a topic for not just Rochester, for the entire country, particularly after post the 2008 recession, when everything sort of dried up, it became almost crisis across the country. And so housing started coming into the DMC discussions. But I just want to set kind of that starting place, that DMC was not really targeted to deal with housing when it started, and that has changed over time. So hit it, Patrick.
Sure. Jeremy, that's a really great question. Mayor, thank you for, yes, I do recall, and ended up being 8 pillars. And Jeremy, I think your question is certainly bigger than DMC, which is how do we increase home ownership opportunities? And I know the city community planning department has been working on this, zoning changes that are taking place that encourage more density. We are also looking at, in fact, we just recently received a McKnight grant to help us around equitable economic development. And we specifically asked or said in our grant application that we want to look for home ownership models for affordable home ownership. And so one, I'll say there's the technical issues with condo development that is related to liability around condos that where condo builders have a 10-year liability associated with their project. And so it really stopped condo development across the entire state of Minnesota. It's beginning to ramp up again in Minneapolis, where they can price them high enough to afford the risk associated with that 10-year liability. So we're just now beginning to see new condos being built only in Minneapolis, I think, in the state. And there have been some efforts at the state legislature to try to wind down some of that liability to the extent that it is becoming an obstruction to multifamily home ownership condos. So setting that aside, we are still looking for co-op models and other models that would enable home ownership for fourplexes or duplexes or eightplexes. And our zoning changes will help enable that, as well as we're creating more opportunity for density along the transit corridors. So I'd say we're definitely interested in that. I know the market is interested in that. People are looking for condos as a way to get into home ownership and wealth building. And we think that's important.
You know, Patrick, I would just chime in on that. That's absolutely right. And home ownership, especially affordable home ownership, it's hard because it's a one at a time strategy. And so, you know, the model historically in the state was, hey, you know, it costs us X amount to build that condominium unit or that single family, you know, new home, modest, you know, first time home buyer home, but we can only sell it for this. And so how do we go find a subsidy gap for each home, right? And then that subsidy goes to that individual homeowner. And so it's a complicated one at a time kind of strategy. And there is some really creative work going on, as Patrick said, around cooperative kind of models. And PPL actually up in the Twin Cities, we're one of the few nonprofits that actually builds new construction, single family home ownership opportunities. It's just a very expensive and inefficient model. And then at the same time, the more crucial need is for the multifamily, you know, housing for the lower income, for the lowest income folks below 30% of median income. That's where the greatest need is, for families with children at very low incomes. And so we've got this question of where's the greatest need? And then we've also got the factor of, well, what's most efficient to build when you can build a bigger unit, right? And we also have this level of need in this workforce housing. So family of four at 60% of median income, family of four earning, you know, $45,000 a year, worker bees, you know, they're working a couple, 3 jobs in that household. And they're working, I guarantee you, in every one of our institutions, including Mayo, right, in our community. And so how do we meet that need? Where is the need? I think, Patrick, we had a market study done of kind of housing needs in this last year or two that I think, is probably a really important source of just finding out what's the need. But then the strategy to get there is also really important.
And Paul, we keep having this discussion about, you know, do we need to build all affordable housing, or if we build some market rate, will people in the affordable housing move into those? I'm sorry, my phone rang in the middle of that. Can you move up, if you will, out of affordable housing into a you know, a condo or a townhome or something that might be more moderately priced, and then free up some affordable housing in neighborhoods? And so that's a possibility as well, and a different strategy.
It is, and that kind of, how can we build supply across
Exactly
the income spectrum is absolutely, that is part of the solution. That is our experience in the Twin Cities is that is a really long-term solution, building enough housing to get folks to free up and move out of their more affordable rental housing. It's just a long time to get that supply to really kind of, I call it the trickle down, to trickle down the benefits and the availability to those more lower income families.
And I want to concur with Brooke's comments in the chat about how lucky we are to have Paul with his expertise in this area on our DMC board. Even if DMC isn't the one building the housing, because we have these robust discussions, it informs all of us so that the city or the county or whomever can move ahead, or the free market.
Let's move on to another question. And you need a better phrase than trickle down on the housing thing, I think. So just a suggestion. Barry, you've had your hand up, so I'm going to unmute you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. To be honest, I mean, I agree with a lot of what's been said. However, I think it's a little bit Pollyannish in a way. I think I know that there are a lot of people in Rochester, not necessarily the majority, who feel a little less encouraged about DMC now than, say, when I came like 11 years ago, and then when DMC started about 7 or 8 years ago. And like, to be very specific, the downtown sidewalks are actually in very bad shape. And for some reason, DMC hasn't been willing to sort of give the money to fix the downtown sidewalks that's so hurting the downtown businesses, the residents, and the visitors. So I would like, and especially now that Discovery Walk was postponed a bit, I think it's so important to actually do and have DMC pay for the downtown sidewalks. Other issues would be the Chateau Theater. There's no real concrete plan about how to move forward, and I haven't seen any momentum in it. People talk about it, but there's really no details behind that. And even something as easy as the TV set that was supposed to be right in front of the Wells Fargo building, and that somehow they decided not to do. That would have been a wonderful thing. It was part of the concept plan that Patrick had put out about a few years ago, but it never happened. So I'm just wondering if someone can clarify where these particular items are. The TV set in front of the Wells Fargo building, why they didn't do that, why they don't put more money into repairing the downtown sidewalks, and the Chateau Theater. Is there, like, when they're going to have a concrete plan to actually do something about those 3 areas? Anyway, thank you. I hope somebody can answer those issues.
I will
Sure.
share that we did get several questions about the sidewalks from others'
Sure.
emails. So
Sure. Absolutely, sure. So we have a very clear concrete plan with Chateau Theater, and that concrete plan is to operate it as a event center, exhibit center for 3 to 5 years, as we saw other opportunities grow that would take it on for a more long-term permanent use. So I think there is a very clear plan. The city entered into a contract with an exhibit organization. They got launched just before COVID, and like all exhibit environments, have had to postpone operations. So a lot of clarity around that one. Maybe some disappointment, Barry, by some people, but still a lot of clarity around that.
Well, but the
with
longer
respect-
term
Let
And
me just
plan.
finish.
Barry, hang on.
Okay.
yeah,
Fair. So just I just want to be clear. I mean, I understand there's disappointment, and there will be in all of this work, and I think that's part of what we have to normalize and accept. I want to just reflect for a moment, and Paul, you'll remember this. Many years ago, a seminal moment in my career had to do with an evening I spent late one night. It was a spring night, much like this, with a conversation regarding the design of a roadway, Shepherd Road in St. Paul along the river. And there were very strong feelings about how that road would be designed and where it would be located and its features and amenities. And the meeting went late into the night, as often happens. And the next morning I flew to Detroit because I had a meeting with a counterpart working on Riverfront in Detroit. And so as I was beginning my meeting with him, I was thinking I was going to commiserate with him and telling him about this late night meeting I had with 100 people that showed up. And he looked at me and he said, "Do you mean people show up at your meetings? Do you mean people care enough about your city that they show up at your meetings?" He said, "Understand what a gift that is. And that controversy or that spirited debate is in fact a reflection of the kind of passion that exists in your community. And so I think we should expect there to be differences and passion around certain projects or the timing of projects, and some disappointment around when things get done or how they get done. And that's just part of the work in the public domain and the public space. And we need to welcome that and embrace that, and also understand that we don't all get what we want at a given time.
And Patrick,
Chateau
can I,
is an yeah.
can I say, when DMC, the very first visionary drawings came out, and you still show this picture every now and then, that gigantic glass, Y-shaped building, those were conceptual. And a lot of what happens in development, particularly on something like this, is there are visionaries who draw plans. We have discussions. And I think to Barry's point about the TV, there was at one talk about having that be sort of different, but then it was rethought with the peace fountain, putting the peace fountain back in. And so changes have happened throughout the whole thing. And I think you've been really clear that at some point, maybe we'll talk more when, at phase 2 or on Discovery Walk, we can talk more about those types of amenities, if you will, for the community to be added, or visitors. But the designs are iterative.
I'll tell you that one of the reasons that some of the faith communities got together in 2015, especially the churches downtown, is they looked at some of the drawings and they went, our churches aren't there. And they thought and they didn't know why their churches weren't there. So I think there is sometimes there's a misunderstanding about these early drawings and iterations and what they actually portend, but still, if people don't understand that, you get this kind of, I am curious about the sidewalks though, so. Yep,
that's a city and DMC thing. Patrick, you want to hit it?
So one, I think my personal commitment and our organization's commitment to accessibility and walkability and safety and universal design and assistive technology, I think has been reflected in all of the work that we have done. And I think the downtown sidewalks are in desperate need of repair and improvement. And I think they're at last year's DMC budget process, DMC approved support to repair some of those sidewalks. I think there is a need to balance in terms of DMC doing basic city infrastructure versus doing things that are extraordinary. And so, but that said, there was support in the DMC capital improvement budget for beginning the repair of downtown sidewalks. Mayor?
And I would say, I would just say this year, as our developers and Aaron Parrish from the city had talks with businesses, they asked that we wait until next year, given the heart of city construction. I think they felt that they needed a year to rebound because people are now starting to come downtown and they didn't want to close up. There's already Broadway work being done and already heart of the city, and the downtown streets are getting close, in the next month or so to opening up. Is it First, and some of those side streets will be clear again very soon. And they just didn't want to add one more complication to, deter people this year. But it, as Patrick just stated, it is funded in the DMC. The city will have ongoing repairs. And I think between the two of us, this will get started next year. And I completely agree. It's bad.
Yeah, it's bad. And I've certainly been paying attention to all the feedback and concerns that so many have been expressing. And then the DMC meeting this morning just said, we can't delay the sidewalk at the expense, or just because we're also delaying Discovery Walk. We can't keep pushing that out, as it is such a high priority and a safety concern for those in our community. So.
Could I ask a question?
Yes, Bruce, go ahead.
The bubbles, the metal bubbles that you put at every intersection for blind people to tell where the intersection is makes havoc with driving a wheelchair across. My wife was in a wheelchair. I've watched other people. It shakes terribly. How do you do a wheelchair with those continued processes I live out here at 55th and 18th. We have those bubbles on our sidewalk where the street goes through. But to wheel a wheelchair across them is a real problem. What do you do about that?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's definitely a concern. It is an issue. That the referring to the
Metal plates with the bubbles in.
called truncated domes in the engineering jargon, to help guide blind people and help blind people or sight impaired people know where they are, does in fact compromise people who are rolling. So yeah, understand.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. We had several questions come in on topics around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Al, I know that you had some. I thought maybe I'd call you out rather than read one of your questions. If you want to, is that something you'd like to? I'm inviting you to unmute, Al. Al, you need to unmute.
Thank you. There you go. Thank you. I'm looking at the vision that that I found, the original vision of the DMC that says that 7 core experiences that address demands, which will contribute to Rochester becoming the world's premier destination medical center. It's a very aspirational, very global, very broad. Okay, so clearly the DMC EDA is addressing the downtown brick and mortar infrastructure. It's in itself, it cannot, I don't think, really get at achieving the world's, okay, implying global, implying that is a showcase. Okay, so I guess my question really is that, given the fact that originally we all thought that DMC would provide everything to achieve that, and then we realized it's not, right? It's really just a brick and mortar downtown core. So I guess my question is, given the fact that we have so many different initiatives that are going on in our city, such as in the ICI, the Intercultural City Initiative, we have City of Compassion, we have Sustainability Task Force, and so there are a number of these major initiatives. American City of Health, another one. So I guess I'm looking for a consolidation, a clearinghouse on top of this, so that all these issues can get their intersection there. How do we make sure that the overlap is being really invested properly, so that we don't we have redundancy, and then also we don't leave anything behind also. So I guess that's really my question, really.
It's time for me to take off, so I'm going to let the other two answer. But I want to say tomorrow is Rochester Diversity Day through ICI. So I'll be posting about it. Hope you'll all join me in celebrating the diversity of our community. And I'll let Patrick and Brooke, President Carlson, answer this. And I have to go to the other meeting. But thank you all for your interest.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you. I ask big questions. Okay, so that was the one that
You always ask big questions.
Yeah.
So
like
Mayo Clinic. So we start with the fact that Mayo Clinic already is a global destination, and it is so we start with that already. But I think part of what I'm hearing you describe is, what role do we all play in contributing to the growth and diversity and inclusion of the community? And so when I was doing my opening comments and the slides, and I said, in a way, what DMC does is pretty boring until you get to the magic of it. Like, what's the lens we look through in making decisions? How do we be more intentional about being inclusive and Council President Carlson talked about the co-design process. The co-design process that is intentional about bringing communities in to participate in the design decisions, because we know, and we know this by research, when people participate in design, in any decision about their community, they feel included. They feel like they are welcome. They feel like they are part of it, and they feel like their kids are a part of it. So how do we create more times, more places that community members can participate in the real decision-making that's going on, or at least contribute to, significantly contribute to shaping those decisions? We look at the intentionality around, as Paul talked about, around affordable living and turning our downtown into a place that people can afford to live without a car, can walk to work, can walk to childcare or groceries, where they are interacting with different, multi-generational experience with college students and with seniors. How do we ensure that the prosperity, as the mayor talked about the number of construction jobs, but the commitment that we have made to ensuring that women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses have opportunity to receive those contracts. And setting those targets isn't enough. Our board, and I looked at Paul Williams, said, Patrick, here are the ways you do that. Setting a target is nice, but you have to feed the pipeline, and you have to do things like create the contracts, build the bidding process, so that smaller contractors, startup contractors, oftentimes owned by people of color, can effectively compete for that bite of the apple. So I think the way we see ourselves participating in that is to use that as a lens for all of our decision making, and to be intentional about inclusiveness, creating a welcoming community, and a feedback loop that helps us get better at it.
Maybe the question is larger than the DMC, actually.
It is,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
The question really is that we have a lot of good things going on. As you have stated, we have passion, we have energy, we have skills, we have all the element here. What we do not have is an overarching marketing message that communicate all these efforts are going on.
Mhm.
To really bring some, I call it beam, okay? Beam up the spirit, right? Inspire. We actually do have a lot of assets. We're coming from a space of abundance, actually. I think Paul mentioned that, in his statement. The places he worked with typically are the achieving, economic deprived space. And Rochester thankfully, well, we're not perfect, but we're one of the better places. So our challenge is to say, we want to really get better and not complacent. We want to be better at it. We have work. And then in fact, we want to tell the story, how that we can actually take the journey from being pretty good now to really being great, right? Being the premier. In fact, the whole world will look to this place. That is my own personal kind of feeling about. So I guess I think we're lacking the overarching communication plan, I believe.
Paul,
Al,
Brooke, you
I'll
have
stop at
something
that.
you'd like
I'll
to?
stop at that. Okay.
Al, I think
Sorry, Al.
right before the pandemic started, I had gone through that exercise to map all the different initiatives and groups meeting related to health and the root causes or social determinants. And it's just it's very pretty because it's so many different colors of all these somewhat connected, but disparate efforts. And I know the mayor's sustainability and resiliency task force has done some work to coalesce some of the different moving pieces, but I continue to hope and believe that now as we steer forward, hopefully out of the pandemic, we have more opportunity to find those synergies again and connect the dots so we can build some of those messages as a community instead of in pieces of our community. We do see this happening, I think, related to economic development, specifically with Patrick's leadership and Ready and Collider and the Small Business Development Center and the city coming together to think about our shared goals related to economic development, and not only from an infrastructure or business perspective, but from what Patrick is talking about and really building our pipeline or building our capacity of members of our community and members of our diverse communities to grow into leadership in those spaces. So I see that as such a strong example of how we can do this work together, and there's such sincere willingness to collaborate and develop those shared goals and outcomes, so we're not just stepping on each other and doing our own thing, but instead working together as a community.
And I think I would just, I would offer a little bit of a both and perspective on this. And, you know, integration, connectivity, having everything fit nicely under one umbrella and be coordinated is a good thing. And we need to work towards that. And collaboration is the middle name of Minnesota, for goodness sakes, right? I mean, we collaborate on it. We fall all over ourselves to collaborate. I would also suggest to you, though, that I believe in also, when Patrick talked earlier about my emphasis and my thinking around building capacity in community. I love to have power dispersed. I love the fact that there's an ICI that has energy and movement, that not everything needs to reside in the DMC. Even though the tagline for DMC is DMC everywhere, DMC from my perspective actually should not be everywhere. The community of Rochester needs to develop, and already has, I would argue, your community foundation. I've said this to Patrick and to Lisa for a couple of years now. Your community foundation should be a platform, your United Way, your Chamber of Commerce, right? Your community-based organizations, particularly community-based organizations in communities of color. When those communities and those institutions have power and agency and the ability to articulate their vision outside of government, right? We need to build capacity outside of government, outside of the DMC. That's what really brings voice to the table with some power. And sometimes that does result in some fragmentation and some disconnection. But when we depend on one entity to bring it all together, we're all kind of stuck there then together under that umbrella. And sometimes great ideas and innovation, again, this is real, this is community organizing, community development thinking, right? PPL up in the Twin Cities is a strong entity, independent of government, independent of the foundation community, independent of the business community. We have voice and agency. We can get things done outside of those entities, and that creates different kinds of outcomes. And I would argue that strong institutions in community are actually part of the long-term strength and viability of a community like Rochester. I think your community foundation is an incredibly important resource. And their work around housing in the last several years actually has been quite important. They ought to be, we ought to be yelling at the community foundation to, hey, pull us together around these issues of racial equity and diversity, pull us together around the arts and kind of our civic institutions. We have that to a certain extent up in the Twin Cities with the Minneapolis Foundation led by R.T. Rybeck, right? Those are community tables for dialogue, for discussion, for innovation, for ideas, and they are separate from government and they are separate from the business community, from the Mayos of our community. And I think that's actually a good thing.
Okay, thanks, Paul. I did want to honor some of the questions that came in, and I called on some people who submitted them who are here with us tonight, but we did get a question from someone who's not here. It's a long question, but let me kind of paraphrase. And I know that the different DMC districts were kind of stacked for work, starting with the heart of the city and kind of moving out to other things. But this person was asking about what's called the UMR Recreation District. And essentially their concern is that there's been a lot of changes in terms of what's being talked about there, and some action had been taken that the questioner thought had displaced and disrupted businesses and homes. And there was just a lot of uncertainty around what's going on with the UMR Recreation District, which is well, Patrick, why don't you describe what that district entails? It's down there by Soldiers Field and the YMCA.
Yeah, for everybody's benefit, the University of Minnesota Rochester had in early 2015 had been working on a campus master plan as they imagined their future and envisioned that happening and occurring in the area around Soldiers Field next to YMCA. And over the past several years, there has been land acquisition, land assembly taking place, which was supported by local sales tax. Actually, at least some of it's been supported by a local sales tax to assemble land that might be their eventual campus. Right before the pandemic, the university was in negotiations with a developer to begin a first step of that with a student housing and faculty space. And then that was set back at the beginning of the pandemic. I think they have developed, and I don't want to speak for Chancellor Carroll on this, but I think I know they have developed an interim step with faculty and student space more central in the downtown in the 318 Commons building where they have student housing. They are also taking up space at 1 Discovery Square, potentially 2 Discovery Square as well, for student learning labs and student classrooms. And I think they're occupying some of the apartment building called Residence at Discovery Square, occupying that as student housing. So they've come up with some pretty innovative solutions to the current situation in terms of how to accommodate their growth. Their number one goal, their number one intent is to not stymie growth. And they have had tremendous growth because there is a lot of appetite for that program. It is probably the fastest growing university, certainly in Minnesota, and as a percentage, perhaps one of the fastest growing in the country. It's relatively small, understandably so, but it has continued growth and interest. And so they are finding shorter term solutions to ensure that that growth can continue.
Okay.
While you're looking at your next question, I'll just say that that there has been conversation in the community around extending the Discovery Walk, the linear parkway that's going to be created from down 2nd Avenue. Will be known in the future as Discovery Walk from essentially the front door of the Gonda building down 2nd Avenue, and with the potential of connecting all the way into Soldiers Field and to the river. That's sort of a new idea that's been emerging in the community, that extension, and that too would relate to the proposed University of Minnesota campus area.
Any other? I'm not seeing any hands up. Okay.
Nancy. Has her.
Yes, I've been to 3 meetings and worked at an elderly facility today. I was at the WE meeting this morning with Christine Beach leading it, and with the Collider group and Ready. That's a group that consists of a lot of different people that are involved with the DMC. And then I went and worked at Gramercy with one of my from Small Business Big Impact, Wild to be a Teacher at Gramercy. And having attended a funeral yesterday for a 37-year kindergarten teacher that's part of Shorewood, that I held her birthday party with 100 education people from the community at 90 years old. 2 years ago on the weekend of the flood. And so we all gathered, and I was 60, so we were celebrating together that I was one with Nancy's Home and Garden of 11 years to be able to break open not getting any money between all of this, moving to Southeast Minnesota for a 38-year vocational educator and NAMI trained and a 4-tier teacher, and now turning this all around for the $1 million challenge for the whole DMC to bring the whole vocational education through the Jeremiah program with the last 2 rocks in here in the building for nonprofits out to Southeast Minnesota. And I'm doing my state university doctorate between Wisconsin and Minnesota out of Triton for the whole, we were one of 2 schools through the state of Minnesota that did the cooperative vocational education piece. So, but anyway, we know that that's going up to the Capitol right now as we speak with the legislation. It was announced at the ABWA meeting on Monday. Tuesday was with the Soil and Conservation meeting with the whole Dodge County Conservation being able to turn this around to work with education industry and nonprofits through the whole Bench Cubed initiative, Communities United. And as I listen to all these professionals speaking here, it's so great today going through all those meetings and recognizing that this piece is going up at the Capitol for 2 major things that will bring tons of money through the legislators all collaborating over all of this for cradle to career, field to table, cradle to career, learner to earner, journey to growth, and the networking groups that a lot of you have been involved with that I was initially in for daycare, housing, transportation, healthcare for the bench, which were the Civil War bench for the 30 Civil War benches for my son, Eagle Scout of the Year and 20-year single mom, to be able to put this all together. And we decided through all the meetings today that this is going up to the Capitol, and what it's going to duplicate, bring more money through the DMC for this piece than anything that we could do for the legislation up to the Capitol for mid-June, for this all to come together for bench, business, industry, economics, E, education, continuous learning, and nonprofits, philanthropy, C, communications technology, and H cubed for health and wellness, human relations, human resources with the DMC or Rochester DMC for the health and wellness for the Olmsted County Health and Wellness, and connect it with the whole Southeast Minnesota for Dodge County.
Nancy, you got a question? Nancy, can you get to a question?
No, so what I want to say is, Paul, you're amazing for the voice, having a voice for Med City Rural to the Capitol, which I'm working with through all of this. And the realization through all of this is that in this piece going up to the Capitol, local systemic sustainability, and Al Len made a connection to this, is that it needs to be local to tie this all together. And what we've been struggling with is DMC is Med City. We need to include Olmsted County. We need to Olmsted Medical, which I can't attend because I'm low income from Dodge County. And we have to deal with the housing through getting our immigrants in and our children in the bottoms of churches. And all those things that we have going. I'm working with the US Bill Gates through not only United Way, but also US of Rochester Chamber of Commerce for the area coming out here. But we celebrated today that we're going to pull this all together for a win-win-win for money for the Rochester for $350,000 from Oxbow Park all the way to the Boy Scouts selling their Boy Scouts, but the whole game haven through all of this, and taking it to Dodge County. And that's the only Dodge County park with the whole Civil War, bringing that history in, and from between Rochester, bringing this all together. And we can bring more money here for Rochester and that for the whole park and rec, for daycare, housing, transportation, healthcare. And then the second thing is to bring in the government sector for the whole Zumbro Education District for technology and handicapped and
Nancy, a question, or you just want to share?
No,
I want to move on if you don't have a question.
Okay. Yes. How are we pulling this all together for the next weeks here to make this happen? to be the most amazing thing for Southeast, not only DMC, but for local systemic sustainability, education, economic, social, and justice, criminal justice, going up to Ellingson to pull this.
Okay, I think Patrick has his hand up to maybe try to respond.
Yeah, I would just want to reflect, and thank you, Nancy, and I just want to reflect on and really one of my takeaways from your comments is just how interconnected all of this is, and the work that each of us is doing is connected to so much of the work that's going on with others. And I just simply want to acknowledge that we understand at DMC that we are one part of the puzzle, and we're given the floor tonight, but we understand that we are really just part of a much larger system of community and decision making and priorities, and we want to use every one of these opportunities to be transparent about how we can be helpful and what we think of priorities are, but also better understand what others think priorities are, so that we can be most responsive and respectful. So Dave, that's what I wanted to just say in response to Nancy's comments.
Thanks, Nancy.
Okay.
Nancy, we're gonna move on, okay?
Okay.
All right, thank you. And we're coming up on about 8 minutes, so I want to be sure that someone who hasn't had an opportunity to ask a question, Paula. And we just have 8 minutes, Paula.
Okay, it's a short question. I have repeatedly, I was going to turn on my video, but maybe it's, anyway, I've repeatedly come before the DMC board and pointed out that within the statute number 5, I just did a screenshot off it when you spoke, Patrick, it says that within the options to spend money, it includes acquire, construct, and reconstruct, ...
Yep.
Cultural and recreational facilities and so forth and so on. And as you may recall, I have begged repeatedly for a commitment from the DMC to fund, or at least commit $50 million to a new accessible, zero footprint showpiece. The true heart of the city is in the public library. And you know, it's never going to happen. You know, on the city budget, the police department snuck $25 million out from under us by their stealth proceeding ahead with their think bank conversion. And
Paula, you want to let them get to the question of the library?
the question is, will you commit?
Okay.
Instead of having RT Ryback's position's always been, oh, it can only help Mayo Clinic, or it can only be downtown, or it can only be this. But no, it says right there, number 5, that DMC money can be used to build community facilities.
Okay, let's get a response.
Yeah, and again, I'd welcome Paul and or Council President Carlson to participate in responding. So I certainly have seen where the 21st, first of all, our library here in Rochester is one of the best libraries in the country, and not just because we think so, but because national rating organizations think so. And it's a tremendous asset, and it's not because of the building, it's because of the programs and the services and the people who lead it. And so start with that we have this incredible asset. And so what I want to say beyond that is I am quite familiar with libraries as they evolve in the 21st century as really civic places, even more so than what our current experience is, because it is limited. The building itself does limit it and some of its programming. I think this is not a place, Paula, where the DMC board would get out ahead of the city and the city's priorities. And the conversation about the future of the library, I think, belongs squarely with the city. And we will be listening closely and be a part of those community discussions. And if there is a place for us to participate, I think that the board would be open to that. So I think that's where we would see ourselves.
Brooke, do you have a observation? I think the
I'm-
ball bounced it to you.
Yeah. I certainly am committed to the library. I think it is an outstanding resource and has played such an incredible role during the pandemic response. We are going through our process as a council right now in identifying our strategic priorities, and those are looking to be focused on our affordability and housing crisis, as well as supporting economic vibrancy and good governance and community engagement and social equity. So right now, the library specifically has not been called out as a top priority, but certainly the library touches on many foundational principles and is a core service of the city. So I think as we get into more details of our budgeting process, those conversations will arise. We are looking at hopefully a 2-year budget planning process now. So even if we aren't thinking about massive investment in 2022 because of how the budget is shaping up, it also gives us a chance to look into 2023 as we start to think about our resources coming back a little more strongly. So we'll see. I'm very committed to the library. I would love to see an expansion. I just don't know at what point we could get the energy behind it on council to approve.
I am opposed to expansion. You can't put lipstick on a pig and expect it to be something other than a pig. It's not accessible. It was designed.
I'm using the term expansion as in thinking about a new model, different from what it looks like right now.
Be careful, because that's a hot button word.
Kind of like trickle down. Thanks, Paula. I'll give Barry, I'm going to let you get the last word, but make it brief so we have time for a response.
Patrick's responding to this.
Okay, yeah, this is a sort of an easy question, but I'm not sure you're doing this or not. Is there any chance you're going to do a medical museum? Because I know a number of people have actually suggested that at one point or another, and I'm just wondering if that's even something that's being thought of about, or is that just a dead issue for now?
Yeah, I mean, where else should there be a medical museum than in Rochester, Minnesota? So
It could be part of a new public library.
There you go.
There's
There.
even
Paula.
such
There.
cool medical artwork here too.
Yeah, I think well, we are not directly involved in that at this moment. I have been involved in conversations with community members, and I mean, it seems obvious, but we're not directly involved in developing that at this moment.
Okay, that's where we'll leave it.
Can
We're coming up on 8 o'clock, which is our stop time, and I want to take what time there is remaining to thank all of you for coming this evening, especially our guests from the DMCC board and Patrick from the EDA. The mayor had to go on to another meeting, but we appreciate her attendance and input, and I appreciate hearing from the board members and the perspectives that they shared in the opening. And even it was interesting to listen to the conversation amongst you on occasion as you were responding to the questions. We had a lot of questions. Patrick, if I submitted some of those to you, would maybe you could get back to some of these folks or back to us on some of the questions we didn't get to by email? Would that work?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we'll do that. We were and still are streaming on Facebook, so that'll be available. And we have recorded this evening and we'll be posting it to our YouTube channel for those of you who want to review the evening or didn't come in all the way. We're looking at forums in the fall for In the City for Good. But for now, we'll probably go on our usual summer hiatus. I really did appreciate us being able to kind of come back to where we started some years ago. And and to hear from those who are currently part of the Destination Medical Center. I learned a lot tonight, and I think I've been learning over the years what this is about, and it sounds like everybody else is too. So we're still sorting our way through. And I appreciate you coming this evening, and thank you. And I will be pushing a red button here very quickly, and we'll all go away, but have a safe drive home.
Yeah.
I
Thank
want
you,
to say
Dave.
thank you, Dave.
Thank you, everyone.
Very nice job managing this
Thank you,
discussion.
everyone.
Appreciate it.
Okay,
Bye.
good to see you all.